All right, ladies and gentlemen, it is now my honor to bring up attorney Larry Schnapf, who's going to give us an update on the litigation regarding the Mary Farrell Foundation. And so give us an update, if you would. Welcome, Larry Schnapf.
Okay. Thank you. Since we're in Memphis and we're having, whoops, what happened to my notes? Did you take? Okay, that's all right. In addition to today being the anniversary of the Titanic sinking, today is the 76th anniversary of Jackie Robinson debuting in Major League Baseball. So I think it's appropriate, since we're acknowledging Martin Luther King, that we also acknowledge Jackie Robinson. This is Jackie Robinson Day in baseball. I think everyone's wearing 42 today. So I'm Larry Schnapf. I'm going to be talking about the update on the JFK Records Act and also about the Mary Farrell litigation. My comments are mine personally and don't represent the views necessarily of the Mary Farrell Foundation. We do have breaking news. Yesterday, the National Archives dropped another 422 documents from the JFK collection as part of the President Biden memo of December 15th. There was an interim set of documents that, is that me making that noise? Or? Oh, okay. There was an interim set of documents that were supposed to be released before June 30th. So the National Archives dropped 422 documents yesterday. Two of them apparently are not in the JFK collection. They were in the JFK library, but so if you went to the JFK collection, you wouldn't even find them. So that's another interesting aspect. About 370 of those are CIA documents. We haven't had a chance to really look at them. They're up on the Mary Farrell Foundation website. One thing that we did learn from yesterday is that we now have the fourth Mexican president that we now became aware of was a CIA asset. The president from 1976 to 1982 was also a CIA asset. So now we have four consecutive Mexican presidents that were CIA assets, and that was largely the reason why the CIA was withholding many of the records about Mexico City. We learned in the dump in December. Many of us knew this informally, but the government was not officially recognizing this. And so some of the records involving Oswald in Mexico City, the reason they were being withheld was because the CIA was concerned, well, at the time, they were concerned that if the world or Mexican people had learned that their president was a CIA asset, that the government would have collapsed. Why that government, which I think ended somewhere in the early 70s, why that concern kept the records classified all these years is another issue. But they finally have begun to release these records. So, another record that was recently released was the record about, there was some information about Oswald that we all knew about, but it was collected by an Australian station, CIA station located in Australia. And until 2017, that document was redacted because at the time that we were having that listening station in Australia, we made a promise to the Australian government that we would not let the Australian people know that we had a listening station on their soil. So the CIA was having that document redacted at the same time that there was a popular TV show in Australia about what? Our CIA station in Australia. So these are the kind of silly things that we're dealing with. So I want to give you a quick update on the JFK Records Act, and then I'm going to go through some of the documents that were dropped recently and let you know what we're doing with the lawsuit. So for those of you who are not intimately familiar, in 1992, Congress passed the JFK Assassination Records Act, which required all the government agencies to search their files, scour their files for assassination records and to then have them sent or transmitted to the National Archives and create a JFK collection. That was to be done promptly. Congress said that the American people deserve to know the circumstances surrounding the assassination, and that it was there should be a presumption of transparency and a presumption of disclosure. To help that effort, Congress created the Assassination Records Review Board, the ARB, and they had 4 years, basically, to review. They were tasked with the job of reaching out to the agencies. They developed a definition of what an assassination record is, and they had a very broad definition. And their job is to go out to the agencies, have them scour their files, and the ARB was first to determine if the file was an assassination record, and then number two, if the agency requested it to be postponed or not disclosed, the ARB had the power to overrule that. And if the agency objected to that determination of disclosure, they can go up to the president and have that overruled. President Clinton never overruled the ARB. Basically, what happened was the FBI did a lot of referrals to the president. They actually were the worst agency in terms of pushing back against the ARB. And each time they went to the president's chief of staff, he basically told me, knock head, said, figure it out. Now, the ARB had 4 years. Their job was not finished. Congress decided not to fund them anymore. So they scrambled in the last 6 months, and they were coming up with these agreements where they were accepting certifications from the agencies that they had scoured their documents and gave them, they had certified under oath of the penalty of law that they had complied with the act fully. But there were also a lot of outstanding search requests that remained uncompleted at the time that the ARB went out of business in September of '98. One of the big offenders was the JFK Library, which had lots of records of Robert Kennedy from the time when Jack Kennedy was killed. Bobby went in and grabbed a lot of the records from the Oval Office and took them with him. And we don't know what presumably they involve Cuba and other things. And they're at the JFK Library, and there's a whole bunch of records of Bobby Kennedy's not been released. The ARB was in the process of negotiating an agreement with the trust when they went out of business. They did have a memorandum of agreement with the CIA. And the act said that 25 years from its enactment date, all records should be released unless the president determined that the records had had identifiable harm that posed such a risk, was of such gravity, that it would outweigh the strong public interest in disclosure. So October 2017 was the date of 25 years from the enactment date of the act. And in September, starting in July of 2017, the NARA started working with the agencies to figure out what documents were going to be released. I sued NARA 2 years ago to get the underlying documentation relating to the correspondence for the Trump decisions. And I've been getting monthly document productions from that lawsuit. And the National Archives initially disagreed with the grounds that the CIA and the FBI were using for postponing records. They got overruled by the National Security Council. And then the National Archives was put in the position of making a recommendation to the president to postpone the records, first for 6 months, and then for 3.5 years in April of 2018. There were 12 drafts of the memo from the archivist to the president. So I'm going to have to go back now and try to get those through discovery to see exactly what the versions were. But we know that the National Archives was not happy with the decisions. So President Trump postponed the disclosure of roughly 14,000 documents to October 26th of 2021. That month, President Biden, because of the pandemic, which is not a grounds for postponement under the act, postponed the disclosure of the records for another year. And we had a document dump in December of 2022. During the build-up to President Biden's first order, a bunch of us got together and tried to get the president we prepared a letter signed by a lot of researchers and also public interest group organizations and open government types to ask the president to release the records. And when that didn't happen, then Bill Simpich and I and a group of other lawyers got together and we started anticipating that Biden may not do it again. In December of 2022, we started working on a complaint. We filed the complaint in October of 2022, and then we got a release in December, which was being touted by the government as 90% of the documents, I forgot what the number, what they were saying, but 90% of the documents have been released. The CIA, at the day of the release, had a secret press conference with a couple of designated media, NBC, CBS, and the Washington Post and the New York Times, and they had talking points. And their talking points basically were, these are not really assassination records. They're not about the assassination. They're not about events before the assassination. Their stuff happened after the assassination. So there really isn't a strong public interest. But so they're basically relitigating what the ARB had already said, that these were assassination records. So we filed our lawsuit in October. The government has filed a motion to dismiss. We filed a response to that. And then I got another document dump, which got some new information. And we filed an amended complaint earlier this month. Actually, it was in March. And now the government has agreed to it. We were originally going to have an oral argument in San Francisco at the end of this month. It's now being pushed back to June. But our lawsuit isn't simply about the documents that are in the collection. It's actually more about the documents that are not in the collection. It's the searches, that the ARB had started and ran out of time before they could complete their work in September of '98. And as far as we can tell, those search requests have not been completed. And then there's other documents that weren't searched for that we believe should be in the collection. So we're actually asking, to get the records that are in the collection released, in compliance with the law, and then B, the records that are not in the collection, for NARA to go out or the agencies to go out and get them. Now, in 2000, the National Archives moved the regulations of the ARB into their set of regulations in the federal code. And in doing that, they said that they were the successor in function to the ARB. And as far as we can see, successor in function, what does that mean? Well, it means the functions that the ARB carried out, which was to search for records, to order agencies, to turn them over, and to determine if records were assassination records. And the ARB hasn't done that. And so a good part of what we're trying to get is to get the ARB to do the work it's told the American public that it was going to do. And as far as we can tell, they have not done any of that work since they made that announcement in 2000. So we're trying to get an order from the court. Well, first thing is that the government has filed a motion to dismiss. And if we survive that motion, then we start having fun, because then we can do discovery and other stuff. And I really can't talk too much more about the details. The amended complaint is on the Mary Farrell Foundation website. And also the record dump from yesterday is now on the Mary Farrell website as well. So they have it, if you go by the Search Explorer feature, you actually can go by agency. There's two ways. When you go to the page, you can just click on the document dump and you'll have like 6 pages of documents. But if you go to the next one, which is the Explorer, it actually breaks it out by agency. So you have the 2 records from the JFK library that, if you searched it narrow, they wouldn't be there. You have the 373 CIA documents. So let me show you what President Biden's order did. I think in response to our lawsuit, the agencies did a little more documentation this time than they did in the past in terms of explaining why they were seeking postponements. But we still think that they essentially took the position that if there's an identifiable harm, that's all they have to do. And they really undercut the whole notion of public interest. So, all right. This is President Biden's memo. I'm not going to go through each page. You can be able to access this. I want to go to the important parts. And I use different colors, not because one's more important, but just sometimes if you see all yellow, it gets hard to read. But the important thing that Bill and I noticed, so this is section 4. This is what the document dumped from yesterday. This is the temporary certification. And you see at the very bottom, June 30th, 2023. So what had happened was the agencies, since December 15th, the order from the president, were supposed to review the records once again. And then if they wanted to object to release, they would have to notify NARA by May 1st. And then NARA had till the end of May to cut a deal with the agency. At that point, if they couldn't reach an agreement, it gets elevated to the president. So what we saw yesterday were the documents that the agencies had no objection to releasing. We don't know if there's going to be any more documents released. Curious that it happened 2 weeks before our original oral arguments, but maybe that's just a coincidence. Let me see. I want to go to section 7. This got almost no attention. We did get a lot of attention from the media for a couple days, which was unusual. Usually the media, well, the press always does some stuff, but we got articles, we had actually interviews on TV, including MSNBC and NBC, which typically does not do anything about the Kennedy records because, as Alec Baldwin told us at the mock trial, NBC has a policy supporting the Warren Commission. We're in a very upside-down world now where Fox News and the more conservative publications are actually paying greater attention to the Kennedy records, and it's the liberal and the Democrats who are actually defending the intelligence community. It's a bizarre world we're living in right now. Section 7 created what we call transparency plans. Now, this is a non-statutory provision, and this is in the order, and essentially this is eviscerating the act. It's essentially saying the act is over, and it's basically saying the president is no longer going to be involved in the declassification of JFK records. What it's saying is that the president asked the agencies that have equities in the remaining documents to come up with transparency plans that would describe event-based or circumstance-based conditions that will trigger disclosure, and that this will be processed by the National Declassification Center. Now, under the statute, it's the president who has a sole and non-delegable duty, in other words, he can't give it to someone else to do, to declassify records. He has now delegated this responsibility to the National Declassification Center. Moreover, the National Archives has told the president in the last of the yellow that these transparency plans comply with the statute when they don't, because they have conditions that don't actually they don't have to have criteria, they're not in the statute. So before we get to this transparency plan, so here's what the CIA did. First, the CIA, and each agency did this. I know this is hard to read, but you have this, you'll have these materials that you can access. But this is the CIA so the National Security Council is the one that's tasked with compliance with the JFK Act. So they come and they talk to the National Security Council. And so this is a letter they wrote telling them that they're, seeking, this is December 8th, and that they want more postponements. And the top says, in our case, CIA has proposed specific information for continued withholding only where we have determined in accordance with Section 5G2D of the statute, that's a section that regards periodic releases, and the President's October 22, 21 memo, that's from last year, that there is an identifiable harm to intelligence operations that may result from disclosure, and that the harm is of such gravity that it outweighs the public interest. How? This says it does. It's a conclusion. Now here's the blue is where they try to relitigate the issues. The limited redactions that remain are necessary to protect information that would identify particular CIA employees, intelligence assets and sources, specific tradecraft and intelligence methods still in use, CIA cover mechanisms, facilities, specific operational details, foreign intelligence, liaison relationships, certain CIA installations, and still classified covert action. That's actually not the section I was thinking about. There's somewhere else where they talk about the record is not actually assassination records. I think that's in this one. So then that letter goes to the National Security Council. NARA blesses it, and now this is the official letter to the president asking for postponement. And you know what FOUO stands for? That's right, yes. So, and I guess means unclassified, right? The U next to it. So this is a letter to the president, and so this is the second paragraph, the second yellow paragraph. This is what remains redacted in the documents in this collection are not related to the assassination itself, but rather are primarily post-assassination documents, and the details which remain classified concern intelligence sources and methods of current relevance. From 60 years ago? But this is how they're relitigating what the ARB said. Let's see, the green. The redacted information contains, okay, so this is the yellow part. With respect to the so they're saying this again. With respect to the remaining provisions, unreleased names and or the identifying details, they are neither relevant to the assassination, nor is there any public interest to be served by their disclosure, since the disclosure of the identities of these specific individuals, separate from the content of the underlying records, adds nothing to the public's understanding of President Kennedy's assassination or the subsequent investigation into the event. Conversely, there is a strong national security interest in the continued postponement of the identities of these individuals. So then it goes into the various areas. So the first one was names of personnel, and then it's CIA locations. The bottom is intelligence and operational details. So this is how they're justifying further postponement. The blue here, so the top one says, I am aware of no public interest in disclosure that outweighs the serious and tangible harm. Tangible harm is not a defined term. Okay, I gotta go faster here. So you can see, you can read this at your leisure. This is basically saying the same thing for each section. This is a transparency plan. And there are, essentially what they're now saying is that for the intelligence agencies and employees, that the records will not be released in full until they're dead. They use a 100-year rule. If they can't determine how old the person is, they use a 100-year rule. You see the next paragraph, 2024 or 2042. So this is how long they're expecting that some of these documents won't be released in full. DOD had a similar letter. This is the DOD's transparency plan. So they have redactions, they have the reason, the number, and then the event that's triggered, and then the events, here are the events that they use to say what the ground is for postponement. Number 3, from the date of the partnership or diplomatic relationship are formally dissolved. What they're saying is if we have a strategic relationship with somebody, think NATO, right? And they object to a document being released, that document will stay withheld until that strategic relationship ends. So there's a Justice for Kennedy Act, which would eliminate, it's been submitted to a couple of House committees. It's in the subcommittee of the Intelligence Committee right now. It would remove all of the restrictions on releases of records that are currently in the statute, things like tax records, and within 30 days of passage, these records will be released. So I don't know, we've been trying to follow this. It moved in one committee to a subcommittee. We'll see if this has any traction. And then the last thing I want to talk about in the minute or so remaining is that in terms of the future generation, we're at the age, we're coming into a really special age of AI, and there's a new book came out, the Declassification Engine, which they basically use a tool, machine learning, to evaluate 170,000 records that were of the Department of Defense and NSA. But we can actually, the next generation of JFK researchers is going to be able to use this tool. For example, what they've done is they have a redacted term with unredacted words next to on either side of it. They're able to use machine tooling, machine learning, to figure out what that term was that was actually redacted. There are things you could read from these documents that in a few days, poor John Newman has all these interns working for him for a long period of time. I mean, now if we get this machine learning, John could spend more time writing and not having to all these people having to tell him what the documents say. I don't want to, just it's a tool to help. But this is really important stuff, and I think the next generation is going to be able to use this. David.
Larry, I have one quick question. We had this conversation about Steve Cohen,
Yes.
as far as being a proponent of releasing everything. Who do we have as friends in Congress besides Cohen, if we have any, on this respect?
Well, in the House, in theory, what we're trying to do, I was on Tucker Carlson, and there are people that on the Republican side that are, for whatever, the motives may not be pure, but there are people in Congress. Schweikert is the Arizona representative. But what I would suggest is if you should go to see if your representative is sitting on the Intelligence Committee, the Oversight Committee, the Foreign Affairs Committee, and Ways and Means Committee. If they're sitting on one of those committees, you should contact them and ask them to urge to have this bill, the bill go for oversight, to have it heard. And then in the Senate, we do have Rand Paul on one of the big committees, but again, it's Oversight, Intelligence, Judiciary. So if your senator sits on Oversight, Judiciary, or Intelligence, ask them to try to get oversight hearing on the JFK Act for compliance. So those are the ways to do it. But Cohen has Cohen. What's the congressperson from California? What's her name? Eshu.
Eshu definitely.
Yeah, Eshu signed the letter. McGovern from Massachusetts signed the letter. So those are three people we know for sure. They wrote. Cohen wrote a letter to the president several times. So they signed each of those letters. But get your congresspersons to, if they sit on those committees, please contact them, because we're trying all we can to get, we're using 3 different ways: media, lawsuit, and talking to your representatives. You had a question?
On December 15th, Biden instructed the National Archives to release 13,173 documents. Do you have any information that Biden responded to my letter of November 9? 15-page letter?
I didn't see your letter. Honestly, November 9th?
Yeah.
Honestly, the decision process was probably done by then. But,
And this is the Washington Post story.
what happens is this would have gone to his chief of staff, and then it'll probably go and routed. The problem I've learned is if you are only signing one, if you only have one signatory in the letter, it usually goes nowhere.
It also went to the vice president.
Yeah, but what you need,
And
you
to the
need,
attorney general.
Right.
And I got return receipts on all 3.
you got what, return receipts, right, but what happens, for these things to get any attention, we learned this in 2017. Carolyn Maloney is my oversight, was my representative. And I sent the letter to her as my constituent, right? Got no action. When we sent a letter with a whole bunch of organizations like that are dedicated to open government transparency type of stuff, we got a response.
I had a brief meeting with Biden on December 15th, 2007.
Yeah.
he told me that he was aware that the CIA was responsible for Kennedy's assassination, but he had other priorities.
Well, presidents are afraid of second-guessing the security, and what we're having now is we have.
Gee, I wonder why.
Yeah, but when we were having the problem with Trump when the records were being taken home by Biden and Trump, right? We were on, the momentum was on our side, but now we have this kid that now released documents that are showing how our allies are supporting Ukraine and its embarrassment. It may go back the other way now, where they're gonna. So it's a very fluid situation, but. Your name with a bunch of other people, I think would be helpful.
Okay, one more talk before the break, yeah.
He's changing the cards
Yeah,
anyway,
okay, so it's time for one more question.
Oh. Bob,
Just want to ask, how does all of this affect Lee Harvey Oswald's income tax records?
the bill that Schweikert, the Justice for Kennedy bill, would eliminate that restriction. So if that bill gets passed, in its current form, we would have access to the tax records. We can also try to get the current bill amended, but, one or the other.
Thank you, Larry.
Okay.
Who's got the thumb drive?
He's still finishing changing the cards, Lisa.
But don't we have to put it in?
Ladies and gentlemen, Larry Schnapf. Thank you, Larry.